Following on from the last video, I got a little bit of feedback from David and Greg. David says that the shape of the ladder actually comes about from the National Maritime Museum plans, and you can see the picture up here. And the feeling is that the reason for the reduction in size of the side of the ladder was really just to save weight. And the other point was made by Greg, who actually made reference to this image, and I should have picked it up, that the pins or the eyes for the cannon tackle can actually be into the hanging knee itself. So that was, I should have picked that up looking at the 3D images. And I continue installing the deck beams. We're now to deck beam 7. And to help facilitate, I don't know why I didn't think of this before, I've made up a number of lodging knees that I can do slight adjustments as we go forward. And of course, I discovered another major error. I don't know why I thought I was installing the second bulkhead under beam 7. Turns out it's installed under beam 8. So I have to go back, and I've taken out the 2 columns. And the good news is I don't have to take out beam 7 and all the various knees. I'm going to be able to fit it in pretty good, so I'm making up the pieces now. I've already pre-fit them so they can work inside. A little embarrassing, but those of you who make ship models know that this is, as they say, par for the course. Now we're going to make up the bulkheads, but don't worry, I'm not going to take you through that. You've been through it already twice. But this work is always improving, so this time instead of making up a solid one-piece bulkhead, I broke into the various pieces, cleaned them all up, and that's going to really help me fit it since I have the beam in the wrong place and I'm fitting it between 2 beams. So that was the best way to get it done. But I will show you, because I'm getting much better at cutting and making up the munions, which are those little pieces of wood that fit between the various glass panes, this time in the door. These munions are tiny. They are 0.017 of an inch, which is about 3/4 of an inch, and I don't think anybody is going to get a munion smaller than that and be able to fit it into the frames. So here's a little snippet, quick snippet of me fitting them into the frame. I used the turbo carver to really just open up the grooves that I had cut on the preac, because I had to make them shallow because of the thinness of the piece. But once they were stuck in place, it was easy for me to open up using the turbo carver and then fit the pieces. Again, I use PVA glue to stick the pieces in because it gives me lots of working time. I put glue in first, then added the piece, and then touched up with a tiny little bit of PVA glue. So that's it for a while. I'm going to leave it to dry probably for a few hours before I sand it and clean it up. Then I'm going to paint it. I know Kurt will probably get a little annoyed at me. It's just too much work to set up the airbrush for something that's going to take me less than a minute to paint. And when that's all dried, we'll put the mica on it, which simulates the glass, seal the sandwich up, and install the doors. They really have come out quite nice. No real issues. Put in some fake hinges. I didn't use the ones that I actually got from Greg a few years ago. These are going to be so hidden up inside that I just added some blackened pieces of brass on the inside to simulate the hinges. And now we're going to put them in. I didn't check, and I can't remember if I showed you this, but I had to make up a little temporary square, which again fits perfectly inside, that allows me to locate exactly where the piece is going to fit. So it's at 90 degrees to the deck. And I just take a pencil and put a line on it. And that tells me where to put the glue down on the deck. And I will scrape it very slightly just to rough up the wipe-on poly. Theoretically, I should only be sticking this directly on wood onto wood. And you, again, because you're using PVA, you can do this fairly liberally, because we're just going to come back now and clean it up. And using some Q-tips to really make sure I don't leave any residue. I had to change my water because it was a little too red. Again, another interesting part is I haven't left the doors exactly open at the exact same angle. So this is probably how it would be in a rail boat, either open, half open, three-quarter open. The door is not necessarily right open at the exact angle. And I can't show you this, but there is a piece of wood here simply to, again, line up all the bottoms to make sure they all line up, because this center piece is perfectly lined up with the line I drew. So in a sense, that just gives me another way of lining the pieces up. Just doing my final inspection. So that went without too much of a hitch. So it's just to put back in the columns, and I'm back to where I was when I started this exercise. Well, today we start on a new challenge for me, which is to build the capstan. And to do this, it's going to be quite a few videos, and I'm going to take you through my learning curve. The first job we need to do is really go through and read over and over the book. And in this case, both book 2, written by David, and more important, book 3, illustrated and written by Greg, because we're going to be using the lathe and the milling machine. By now you'll realize that David loves his manual tools, and on the other hand, Greg is very much like me. We're in love with anything that's got a motor on it. So the old lathe and over there the mill will be really a key component in building these parts. Just so I remind you how I approach building a difficult piece like this, is I read the book 2 or 3 times to get to understand it. And that usually means that I really don't understand 50–60% of it. I'm not used to the terms, and the construction can be a bit challenging. So I then proceed to write down my understanding of it. And the more I write, the clearer it gets. Then I'll go on to the various tools that I have and start to make them. And it's quite obvious when you make a mistake. It shines and looks nothing like the piece. David has a fairly good detailed analysis of the capstan, so I'm not going to go through that. We're going to go straight to constructing the capstan barrel. So if we look at this drawing, Greg makes it up in 3 pieces. David suggests we make it up in 2 pieces, and that's what I'm going to follow. The green line on the left is where I separate the 2 pieces. I start by preparing a square piece of bulk stock that is 20 inches in diameter. You will notice on the capstan, the top and bottom are 1 foot 6 inches in diameter, 18 inches. So we'll cut down on the lathe, but you'll understand why I start off with a square piece, because it's essential in making and controlling the part on both the mill and on the lathe. The blue section in the middle is 15 inches, and that's the only different dimension that you'll find in making up these pieces. The score on both the lower and upper capstan, which is highlighted in yellow, I'm going to ignore these. On the real capstan you would have made this recess, but not on the model. And the last and perhaps most important part of making up the capstan is you'll see on the bottom we have a 10-sided lower section to accept the welps, and on the top there's a 12-sided upper section, and I'll show you how we make these on the mill. The first thing we do is we've fitted it into the square chuck, and we have an end mill, so we get a perfect center, and we'll just create that center and then replace it with the centering piece on the lathe. Now we're going to take this down to 18 inches, leaving the square piece and really making sure that this is really tight inside here, as we actually don't want this to move until the very end. And now we've put the various marks on the piece. So this is the bottom part of the capstan. This is that little part that's not grooved, and this is the lower section. So the easiest thing for us to do now is to actually take this lower section down. We have one more job to do. We're going to replace this support center pin with a drill, because we need to drill a hole in the end. We will put this dowel inside here, probably to about that depth, and this will allow us, this dowel will connect the bottom end of the capstan to the top end of the capstan. And this is the same 5 inches, which we're going to put one at the bottom here, that fits onto the piece already made in the model. And I just want you to notice something. You'll see we're hardly getting any movement here, which means that the piece is exactly at 90 degrees to the chuck. And that's very important, because in the case of the lathe, we were able to support it using the tailstock. When we go to the mill, I don't have a tailstock. So that's why it's very important that it stays locked in here and doesn't move, to maintain that angle. Here we are at my Sherline mill, and I'm very fortunate to have this rotary table, which allows me to put a piece on the end of it and move it in defined increments. In the case of the lower capstan, we're going to cut 10 flattened areas on the shaft, on the barrel. And to do this, we simply mount the piece Now, this is where, if I had an endless budget, I would actually have a support that would fit here and support the end of this piece. But it's fairly tight, and I've actually put a gauge on it, and the gauge has this absolutely parallel to the track. So as I move the piece in and out, it's going to cut the exact amount that I want off of here. To set the height, I brought the end mill right down to the piece. This piece was made slightly larger, so that when I cut the face, I'll end up with the exact measurement that Greg and David want in the book. I've also put on a much smaller end mill. I'm going to cut on 30-degree increments, so let's get started. Now we take the piece back up, and then we turn this 30 degrees. And we come down again. And we put another 30 degrees in. Back down. And here is a perfectly done bottom piece of the barrel. And this is my third one. I actually only screwed up one, which for me is remarkable. But it came out absolutely perfectly, and it really was very easy to do. Having completed this exercise, we're very happy. We're going to do the exact same thing for the top part of the barrel, and we're going to make up this piece, except there are going to be 12 divisions on the top as compared to the 10 below. So it's much easier, and the only difference is we have a square at the top, and that's 11-inch sided square that's 6.5 inches in height, and it fits too many of these pieces, and it fits right on top. Of course, if you don't have a mill, my suggestion is to try and do this manually. It would be very challenging. So I would just actually leave the entire thing round at the 18 inches and just stick the whelps directly to it. And here is the completed section. So it fits very nicely together. So I may have to make some adjustments for this piece to make sure that it fits exactly in my boat, because it may not line up perfectly. Now we're going to make the whelps. And to do that, we need to dimension a piece of lumber. This one is 8 inches by 35 inches. And then what I did is, taking all the measurements off of David's book, I marked out all the pieces and went on the various table saws and cut different depths to give me the angles that I needed. Some of you may not have an angle table. Certainly the Jim Barnes has one, which I have never purchased simply because I had this from Charlie Files. And you use it so seldom, it really was, in my mind, not worth the expenditure since I had it. And basically, you set the angle that you want to cut, tighten it down, and then run this piece through here. What you would do is you'd have the profile drawn here, make sure you get the angles right, and then run the piece through, and you'd get it perfectly cut. Now, in this case, the angle needs to be a little sharper than that, and this doesn't go to the correct angle, so I might have to just cheat a little bit. Now, to get this second cut, which is into the piece, so to get that, I would set the blade to different heights based on where the blade hits my mark. Sorry, it'll be this way. So there's my mark. And now I simply put the fence back on, and I line up that mark with the blade and then run it through the piece. So you see it lines up perfectly with that. So now I want a deeper cut. I'll come up a little more. And just to get this out of the way, see where that cut lines up. That cut lines up here. So again, back on. So you can see we've got all the cuts at different heights. And now I'll just take a chisel and start pulling these down. Eventually put a rasp on it, a file on it, and sandpaper. much easier than I thought it would. So we're going to bring this video to an end, and we'll pick it up, and I'll see you as we continue modeling the HMS Thorn.